What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the balance sheet. Thanks for joining us. I got Raj here, and I'm Billy. Um, Appreciate you guys tuning in again. We've got a pretty fun week this week. We're going to review what's going on in women's wrestling, and we actually both have put together our top 10 list of current female wrestlers, and then our top five all time, kind of prodded by the Sports Illustrated greatest WWE wrestlers of all time list, which came out this week, and the PWI rankings, which came out a couple weeks back. So that's kind of been on our mind, our top 10 rankings. Before we start, in case you haven't seen it, we have it posted on the YouTube channel here. But Mercedes Moné had a cameo sale going on, and we thought, how do we not get a cameo shout out from Mercedes? She is, in fact, the reason why we have this podcast, and actually the reason that the two of us became friends. So it's posted to the YouTube channel here. We got to tell that story one day of actually how we
hmm
started talking. It goes back to the Mercedes Ronda Rousey match at Royal Rumble. But we got a great shout out from Mercedes talking about the balance sheet and all the confidence in the world that she has in us. Because, in case you don't know, the crew's a pretty talented group of people. But Raj, pretty good week. I think NXT really stole the show as it relates to women's wrestling. But what do you have on your mind?
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight NXT right off the top. Kudos to Shawn Michaels. He gave us 45 minutes of women's wrestling in a 2-hour show, which has to be some kind of record. And 26 women were featured on the program, and 18 women had some kind of physical element. I couldn't believe it when I was watching the show at how much just women's segments were back to back to back. And he just did everything right. Sometimes you just have that show that if you're, for us who are fans of women's wrestling, that was like the perfect showcase for women's wrestling. It had veterans, Io, Kyrie, superstar free agents, Julia, Stephanie, up and coming folks, Lash Legend, Jakara, um, what do they call Fatal Influence? Like, Piper and Chelsea made an appearance, and they were super over with the crowd. They kept the tag belts hot, and that's one thing we have championed for on this show. Put the belts on Bianca and Jade and build the other women around them. They've done a magnificent job. I mean, you can't say anything really negative about what NXT did. I mean, obviously, us women's wrestling fans would love that to be the show every week. I don't think that's realistic,
Right.
but they are building up to Halloween Havoc, where clearly I'd be shocked if Stephanie, Julia versus Roxanne and Cora doesn't main event tonight, which is
Yeah.
Halloween Havoc is tonight. I would be shocked if it doesn't main event because all the posters are about them. And the one thing about Shawn Michaels, he doesn't have any problem main eventing women. He will do it. Um, Other than that, I don't know. We're gonna spend not too much time on this, but I know you have your own thoughts, so I'm gonna give you the segue. There was a segment on Raw that was very interesting. So you had the tag team match between, I guess it's the Sky Pirates, which was Io and Kyrie versus, I believe it wasn't Bianca and Jade. Who did they fight? Oh, they fought Jakara, not Jakara. They
Jakar.
fought no, that was on NXT. On Raw,
Yep.
they had a tag match. I think they fought maybe was it oh they were fighting sorry they were fighting was it Tiffany? No, was it no? Who did they fight? Oh, Raquel and Liv. Sorry.
Yep.
I got it now. So it was Raquel and Liv saying, "Hey, we could be the women's tag champs if you want." Io said, "Okay, let's fight." So they fight.
Love the
So
backstage segment there, actually.
they're fighting. They go outside. Jakara, Io punches her, then they punch back. It's a DQ. They all go into the ring. They're all, Jakara and Lasher doing their thing, showing off their moves. It was great. And then Liv and Raquel come into the ring, stare them down. That was good. And then Rhea's music hits, and it's like the C's part. Raquel runs out. She gets beat up in 10 seconds, runs to the ring, beats up Liv, beats up Raquel, beats up Liv, beats up Raquel, beats up Liv, beats up Dom. She stood tall. The segment did monster numbers. YouTube went crazy. Everybody loved it because it's mommy. She's unstoppable. She's back. And my only point was, and I know how you feel about this, at some point, doesn't Raquel have to get some advantage here as the heater?
I think it's already gone, right?
It feels like it, yes.
Yeah. So, you know, this is a complaint that actually I have it in AEW, which we'll get to as well. You kind of book yourself into a corner um, when a talent can't afford to take a loss or to look bad, uh, runs up against a talent who you are not willing to let look bad or lose the upper hand. I just don't know why you bring Raquel back for her to be completely ineffective 100% of the time, really, in holding Rhea off. Um, the way we would have booked that, you said it before she even came back, is you could have got, if you did it right, you could have gotten a whole pay-per-view match out of Raquel Rhea. All you would have needed to do was have Raquel be somewhat sturdy versus Rhea on one or two of these occasions, and Rhea would have needed to beat her down in a one-on-one match, and you could have had it be a pay-per-view showcase. I don't know where you get the heat back for that to be the case for Raquel. Um, so yeah, I mean, I love what they're doing with the amount of women they're featuring. I was more interested in Liv uh, for a couple minutes there this week than I had been in a while. I loved the backstage segment with her mouthing off to EO and Kyrie. I loved them showing letting EO and Kyrie show off their personality. Um, one thing that they've made a great improvement on last week, we talked about, they're featuring women from all different walks of life and background and whatnot. I love, they started it with Asuka. Used to be a lot of pressure on, Japanese women that they have to learn, great English before they're allowed to do promos and stuff. I love that they're doing a lot of their, um, especially, when they're confronting Liv and you've got the mixture of English and Japanese. I think it's real. I think it's natural. Um, but they have such glowing personalities. I mean, EO with the eyes, just kind of like, is it, she's got that look on her face, like, is this bitch, like, just, um, I got a kick out of that segment. I thought it was really, really good for Liv, but, um, then Rhea kind of cleans house, as has been the case. And yeah, the crown jewel thing, um, kind of livened some things up because you got a different mixture of women kind of tussling now, but it also has the feuds they're trying to either get to or finish on pause, um, which happens every year with Survivor Series, and Crown Jewel Survivor Series, things kind of become disjointed because of that.
The criticism that our favorite wrestler has gotten in the past as a babyface, which is Mercedes Moné, I don't think enough people are talking about how ineffective Rhea is as a babyface, other than she gets cheered like nobody else.
Mm.
If you take the crowd out of her presentation, is she a good babyface? Because she has no vulnerability. She wins every match, and if she loses, it's because she is going to get protected so much. I don't know if that's a good baby face. I think she gets cheered and people love her, and she sells, the merchandise, and she's a star of the company, and I'm a huge fan. But if we're just taking her character and analyzing it as a baby face, at least with Mercedes or Sasha, in the ring, she showed you vulnerability. Like, whether you believed her promos or not, in the ring, you felt like she could lose all the time. I never watch a rematch and think she's going to lose. And when she loses, it's a shock. It's even
Yeah.
more than Bianca now, where it's like, oh, Rhea lost? Wow. And even again, the lengths that they go to protect her is fine because she's a cash cow and they want to keep her hot, and I have no problem with that. But then at that point, turn her into something else. Turn her into the female Gunther. Turn her into something where she's just this wrecking ball, and that's fine. Like, remember when she was the champ as a heel and she beat Natty in like 30 seconds?
Yeah.
And a lot of people didn't like that. Everybody loved it though. Like, people love that version of Rhea. So, you know.
I'm gonna make a comparison that people might hate, but I just thought of it, and I actually think it's spot on. It's dead on. When the Shield broke up, Roman Reigns was hot, 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 hot. And if you would have paused it during some of that initial time, no one would have thought Vince was crazy for having him be the guy, right? And then you have the infamous Royal Rumble win where he got booed and they tried to have The Rock, you know. But even if you watch that match back, until the result, he was still very over with that crowd. It was the result that they, were against. Um, they are booking Rhea like Roman Reigns as a babyface. And a lot of the things that didn't work. Now, they did it for years with Roman, which is what kind of turned it so bad as it did. We're talking about 6 months, but just broke up out of a faction. She's the one that gets the catapult coming out of a faction breakup. And, the center of every story, and all that's good because she deserves it. She's a star. But
Mm-hmm.
the story beats do matter. And you you have to have some vulnerability generally in wrestling history, some vulnerability. um how many baby faces over the years got stretchered, right? They don't just do that for
Mm-hmm.
giggles, right? Like those are story beats that invest in a crowd. And they made the same mistake with Bianca with Damage Control. Like, guys, a group of people can beat these women.
Yeah.
It's fine. It will not lose them momentum. They can lose to three people, like in a brawl. That's how it should be. Um, so I love Rhea. I think, as we'll get to our lists of top women in the world, um, you know, she's worth all the money that they're paying her and more. Um, but they're deep into this Liv and Rhea storyline. They had a chance to refresh it a little bit with Raquel, um, and I just haven't seen it yet. So especially with Liv should be focused on Nia, right? So I would have liked Raquel to be a little bit more of a challenge for Rhea. But hey, something I want to just discuss real quick. You brought up NXT. Tag belts were featured there. Also, Kalani Jordan has been well featured on NXT. They've given her a really, really great North American championship run. And then Mercedes is the TBS champion over on AEW. Um, we are in the greatest ever, hopefully not last ever, but we were fighting for all these secondary belts for years. I mean, go back just 5 years and women didn't even have any secondary belts. And WWE, um, NXT, AEW, and ROH all have secondary women's titles. and they're all on women that are very well featured through the show. Bianca and Jade have been amazing women's tag champions. Kalani Jordan has been a great North American women's champion. Obviously, Mercedes gets well featured with her TBS title, and Red Velvet is the TV champion on ROH, right? So um, it's great to see, and something that we just didn't get as women's fans just even a couple years back.
Kalani Jordan is somebody we don't maybe talk about enough, but
We
one
don't.
of the smart things WWE has done with her is they clearly see she's, superstar. She has every it factor you want. She's athletic, she looks great, she is very likable. She has that Bianca babyface Ricky Steamboat quality I talked about a couple episodes ago. But the other thing they've done very smart with her is look at the rub she has gotten. Bianca and Jade save her the first time, or she calls them up. And then the following week, Stephanie and Julia are her buddies. Like, they have done this with her where they're like, okay, you're not the main champion because Roxanne is, but we're going to make sure that the top women, who, whether they're here right now in NXT or they're not, they're going to be part of her story. Like, she's going to have them as friends. And I think that presents her at a star level to the fans. Like, oh, she belongs. She's hanging out with Bianca. She's hanging out with Jade. She's hanging out with Stephanie and Julia. And I think that's very important. And I think why I'm bringing that up is because you brought up Mercedes Moné, you brought up her titles. I always thought that the way AEW would use Mercedes would be that way, which is even if these women don't beat her, we use these women to get the rub from Mercedes because we're going to treat Mercedes like this special attraction. And when you get in the ring with her, you get the rub, even if you don't
Yeah.
win. And again, I think we could spend 2 podcasts about that topic, but that's the one thing. And when my list is revealed, I will discuss that in part of the list. Is I didn't think it was possible to present Mercedes Moné as just another woman. I didn't think that was actually possible because even at her lowest booking in WWE, she still felt special. They've almost got me there with AEW. They've almost got me there because they don't announce her. They don't really praise her up. They just throw her out there. And honestly, it's a little disappointing because she's such a star.
I mean, it is disappointing. She obviously delivers the goods in the ring still. It's so funny as people like talk about her maybe losing her fastball, and you go back and look at her year, and it's a better year than most women have ever
Mm-hmm.
had. Um, but part of the reason why people think she might have lost her fastball is when you're coming out an hour 12 into the show for an 8-minute match, it does make it feel like the producers aren't telling the audience that you're an attraction. So she's having to do all that heavy lifting on her own, and she's capable of doing it. She I would argue that WWE didn't feel special for about 3 years there, but she was able to overcome it. I still think she's overcoming it, but it's harder to do in the AEW environment because of the different production and stuff. Real quick before we move on, um, we had an episode about a month or two ago. Uh, One of our, I think, most acclaimed episodes. You guys seem to love it. The post, what's the post horsewomen landscape going to look like? It is not going to lack talent. My God, I just don't even name horse because we're doing our lists, right? Take away all the horsewomen and take away their peers, right? Like Asuka and Athena and people who were around same time as them. Roxanne, Kalani, Bianca, Rhea, Liv, Cora Jade, Julia, Stephanie. I mean, loaded, loaded, loaded. The only thing I need to see from this group, and I'll take Roxanne out of it because she's done it. I just need her to do it on main roster. We just got to get this group hitting on their matches. Bianca too. I'm going to say Bianca and Roxanne have proved that they can hit on their matches for the most part. I didn't name Io. Io's kind of in the middle.
Yeah,
She's a
she's
sandwich
in there. Yeah.
generation. She's with she's around with the horsewomen. She's going to be around later, but uh, that's one thing that AEW has going for it is their two biggest prospects, Willow and Mariah, have been hitting on their big matches at a higher rate than WWE has on their main roster women. And again, we talked about it with Liv and Rhea. To live up to the horsewomen, the matches have to steal the show. That's kind of the motto of this podcast is steal the show, because that's what they don't have to do it anymore, but they used to have to steal the show to get their place on the card. I believe that they're going to have to continue stealing the show to get back into main eventing more often. That's a whole other topic. But what I started on was the talent depth of the up and comers is just. I mean, I left 15 women off the list that could be a champion one day. I mean, we're deep, deep, deep. So the future's bright.
Stealing the shows is an interesting term because when I watch AEW, especially their premium live events, I don't know other than if you went in a DeLorean and went and got Bull Nakano, Aja Kong, and Manami Toyota from 1995, All Japan, and the matches they were doing, which was blood matches and stunt matches and all these things that Will Ospreay and this generation clearly are influenced by. I don't know how the style that Mercedes wrestles, like her and Willow, to me had one of the three best matches this year. I'm not going to rank them. I'll do that at the end of the year. That match was phenomenal. But on that AEW card, by the fans of AEW, it was seen as the third best match because Ospreay was on the show. And the way Moxley wrestles seems to, gravitate towards that fan base. They love
He had a
that.
terrible match on that particular show,
Is
but
that
I get what you're saying.
who did he fight that match in that show?
The guy from Japan.
Okay,
He
and
was
people love that match.
no. He was that was the one he was disinterested and needed time
Oh,
off.
okay.
Yeah, that was or was that? Sorry, I might be wrong. That might have been the one where
What was the
Mercedes
card called?
might have been Forbidden Door. One of the two first cards Mercedes was on. Moxley had one of those I need a break match where he dropped the title. I think it was actually Forbidden Door, so I'm probably wrong.
So when I look at this, I'm going to look at this card right now.
But
So this is, yeah, go ahead.
I hear what you're saying. They throw the kitchen sink at every match. Every match is allowed to try to do everything, and it's just a battle of who can do the most of everything.
It's him fighting Takeshita.
Yeah, I think that match was bad.
Oh, you know what it was? It was Adam Copeland and Black that had the crazy match.
Yeah.
Where he injured his leg, right?
Yeah, he did something that is almost guaranteed to shatter your legs.
And then you had Swerve against Christian Cage, and then you had the Elite defeating the Team AEW in the Anarchy in the arena match.
Yeah, who'd Ospreay wrestle on that one?
Strong, Roderick Strong. But like, that's the thing. Like, the way Will Ospreay wrestles, it feels like because of how media covers him, he's always going to have match of the night, no matter what.
And but to that group, yes, and that's where she quite doesn't fit in yet. Because I'm going to just say this right here and right now. I don't give a crap.
Yeah.
For my taste, for what I like in wrestling, Willow Mercedes and Willow Stephanie are better. I enjoyed more than any Will Ospreay match I've ever seen, because he pulls me in sometimes. Him and Ricochet, him and MJF. Like, there are 10 to 20 minute segments of those matches where I'm like pretty enthralled and they're doing the things I like. But once you lose me, once my disbelief is suspended disbelief is gone, I'm out of the match, right? So it just takes one no sell or one, you know, uh, kick out of a move that should be significantly more devastating than a finisher, some sort of avalanche pile driver thing or something, and they kick out because it's not like that's how I grade a match.
Yeah.
A fight is a fight is a fight. To me, Bret Hart is, if I had to say the greatest wrestler ever, was just between the ropes was Bret Hart because he did everything like an athletic challenge in a fight. And the best example I could ever show of that is the way he took a throw into the turnbuckle. That running face first into the sternum. I mean, he would make that part of a match feel more important than what you see in a lot of these matches now. But that's my taste. AEW loves the high flying stuff,
Yeah.
and I'm not
Before
saying they're
we
wrong.
before we ever became friends, Osprey and Ricochet had the landmark match, right?
Yeah,
And I remember hearing about it just through the internet, like this, you guys see this match, you guys see this match. Somebody sent it to me. And I watched it and I'm like, okay, is this wrestling or is this gymnastics? Like it was so coordinated. It felt so hokey to me because I grew up Horseman, Randy Savage, where the horseman would hire a limo driver to drive you into a field and beat the shit out of you and leave you there. Like that's the wrestling I grew up on. Yes, I knew it
yeah,
was theater, it was scripted, but like where they would tape Dusty's arm to the wall and beat it with a bat. Like that's what I was used to. I see these guys who are clearly coordinating stunts in the ring with each other. Like, okay, you do your roundhouse backflip, I'll do mine, you do yours. And I'm like, is this wrestling or is this like a tribute to Simone Biles? Because my point has always been if I really wanted to see that, I'll just watch Simone Biles because she's better than all of them anyway. And she's doing it in her sport.
I like Ricochet a lot.
Yes, you're very high
I
on Ricochet.
I love so my favorite version of Ricochet is the WWE NXT version, and I wish they booked him better. I'm not saying he shouldn't have left. That's not my point. What I'm saying is, if you take someone as capable as Ricochet or Will Ospreay, and you WWE makes you dial it back, boop boop boop, couple dials, and sell a little longer, and all that, you get the best out of those guys. Ricochet was incredibly compelling versus getting thrown around by
Yes.
Brock Lesnar.
Yeah. He was.
Incredibly so. Um, and he's had several against Walter or Gunther. You know, I'm hoping that in AEW he takes a couple of those lessons and produces a little bit of that dialed back into it. I'm not saying take the flips out of the match. I'm not saying take the high flying out of the match. I'm saying slow down a little bit in
Yeah.
between and sell the pain, sell the struggle, sell the fight. Um, that's all.
I, I know we're going to get to our list, but before we do, it's peak sexism to tell me how great Osprey and Ricochet are when Kalani and who was her opponent that time? Was it Sol Roca?
Yeah,
And they pretty much had the exact same match.
right.
And everybody's like, "Oh my God, these women, what are they doing? This is ruining wrestling. They're flipping and
They
it's
obviously
time gymnast."
rehearsed. It's
Okay,
like
Osprey and Ricochet inspired a whole generation of matches, and for whatever reason, if women do the same match, it's seen as bad. But to your point, I loved the Ricochet against Lesnar. I loved the Ricochet against Braun Breaker. Like I liked that version of him. It's also why I loved the version of Daniel Bryan in WWE, where he was fighting Triple H and he was fighting Batista, and it was like he was like showing a lot of vulnerability. Again, it's not my cup of tea. This is an old man on the lawn rant. It's like I have with my kids about music. Look, it's art. Everybody interprets things differently. I've had this conversation with my son Adrian, where the music he listens to, I just can't listen to it. Like, I'm not
Right.
criticizing them. I want them to make their money. I hope they save it. But when he plays it in the car, it makes my ears bleed. And honestly, the stuff that I see out of some of these AEW matches, it is just not my cup of tea. Like Swerve, Hangman Page, we were in the audience in Nashville when we were like, oh, when these two lock eyes, this is good. Like, you could feel it. The crowd was hot. We were into it. And we're not even like big fans. And then they took it too far. They
Yeah.
just had to go too far with the stunt show. So yeah, I mean, I think that was kind of our week in wrestling, and we
The
have.
only the
Oh, go
the
ahead.
only
Sorry.
thing real quick we didn't touch on was Camille fought Queen Amanada. Um, I actually I thought the match was pretty good. A little bit around the edges, but in a way, again, I would actually rather have a rough around the edges, but feels like a struggle in a fight match than a every every move was done smoothly and everyone always landed on their feet and it just looks too clean and it doesn't look like a fight. It looks like a show. Um, Camille, I think that they need her wrestling more. Um, I, you know, to establish herself and her dominance. But I criticized WWE earlier for booking themselves into a corner, and I'm going to go ahead and pass that criticism on to AEW as well. I don't know how they book this Camille Chris Statlander match on Wednesday. I don't know how a result helps. Um, I know that the result is likely Chris is going to win. She just won a major feud with Willow, and she's obviously being set up to wrestle Mercedes. But Camille just hasn't done that much as Mercedes heavy to be
Mm-hmm.
losing matches already, in my opinion. I wouldn't have booked this match. I don't think maybe unless Chris has some sort of um backup plan where either Willow, doubtful, or maybe Queen Amanada comes out and attacks Mercedes and distracts Camille in a way that the loss is a little bit softer, but they might have, and hey, I wouldn't mind that because there'd be a story there. I just, I haven't seen the story beats being told in a way where I feel good about how this match is going to end. I hope I'm wrong. I hope that they've got some layers going into this. I don't know that I love the result either way. It wouldn't make sense for Chris to lose, obviously, and again, I think it's too early for Camille.
So Camille and Mercedes, when they got paired up, everybody had the instant, oh, Shawn Michaels Diesel. That's what this is. If you go back and watch Shawn Michaels Diesel, Shawn Michaels might beat an opponent and it would be harder for him when Diesel fought the same opponent. It would be like Michaels would beat him in 10 minutes, but Diesel would beat him in five. And then
Right,
Vince on commentary would be like, oh, Diesel did that pretty easily. Shawn Michaels could learn from that. Instant seeds are being planted. Hey, this guy's carrying you here.
right,
The problem I had with the Queen match, not the match, I actually liked the match. To your point, I liked that it was a struggle. It was harder for Camille to beat her than Mercedes.
right,
Then what is the story? If Camille is going to take longer to beat the same opponent, and she's way more physically imposing, and she's pretty much her bodyguard, in essence, she's Virgil. She's not Diesel. She's Virgil, who was always seen as the person who was a bodyguard, but he was never the wrestler that the $1 million man was. The $1 million man was always the one who won the matches. Like, and sometimes Virgil would help him, but like when like the opponents would just beat up Virgil and throw him aside, and then DiBiase would win. For me, what I need to see out of the Chris Camille match, honestly, should be Mercedes before Chris is about to beat her. Mercedes jumps in the ring, pounds her, they beat her up. Either a stipulation is made that Mercedes has to fight Chris without Camille, or Chris introduces somebody to sit in her corner to fight. But it has to be, you cannot, Camille cannot lose already. I'm sorry. It's too soon for her to lose, but Chris shouldn't lose.
Right. And
So
so I would actually love to see a tag match because I think it'll help lengthen and Mercedes is not just going through. I wouldn't even mind Mercedes losing to Chris in a tag match. Pin
no,
her. I don't care. I think that's actually fine. Um, if Mercedes is gonna end up beating Chris in the pay-per-view, I actually think it would be totally fine at this stage. They haven't presented Mercedes in a way where her first time losing is going to be as big of a deal as it should be. So you might as well do it to tell a better story. Um, man, you kind of got my wheels turning. Like, is Camille Virgil? Because Mercedes is a brilliant $1 million man
yeah, yeah,
playing
yeah.
that role. And you know what? If that's where they're going, because Virgil hitting the $1 million man was one of my favorite moments of my youth in wrestling. And Camille if Mercedes just gets more and more and more obnoxious and she's just shit talking in her face, that could be a gigantic moment for them to build to where Camille finally like clubs her.
I was in Madison Square Garden, 1991 SummerSlam, one of my best attended live events of all time. It's the match made in heaven, match made in hell. Bret Hart won his first Intercontinental title. Road Warriors won their tag. It was one of the
Whew.
great feel good WWE pay per views of all time. If you go back and watch it, if we're going to be out there, 1991 SummerSlam, all the good guys won basically that should have won. We had two title changes. You know, Bret Hart won the title.
Over Mr. Perfect, right?
Mr. Perfect, one of the great matches of all time. Road Warriors beat the Nasty Boys. Great pop. But you know who got, other than Macho Man and Liz getting married, Virgil beating the $1 million man got one of the loudest pops I have ever heard. People lost their mind when Virgil held the $1 million belt like this because the match was for the $1 million belt. And he held it, and people went crazy, and you could see Roddy Piper cheering him on from the booth. It was one of the all-time feel-good moments. So if you can tell the story properly, you can have something, because the one thing we know about Mercedes Moné, Sasha Banks, is when she gets on her role of talking her shit and really, really, really like becomes annoying, when the person who beats her, the poster behind you, that person is made, right?
Yeah.
Like that person is made into a superstar. And if you look at Bayley, Bayley did her part. She absolutely deserves her flowers for that match and that whole story. But man, that promo leading up to it, where she's like, that's why I'm on the main roster and you're still here. And she just cut her down and just called her a loser and over again. And then when Bayley finally couldn't take it anymore, ran it into the aisle and beat her up, it's like all of us Mercedes fans, Sasha fans were like, we just want to see Bayley win. Because that's how I felt going into that match. Like I wanted to see Bayley kick her rear. Because I was like, you know what? You can't talk to her like that. I want to see Bayley teach you a lesson. And that's great storytelling.
Absolutely. Funny thing about the crew, right? Sasha Banks, Mercedes Moné fans. Um, she's had some tragic booking, which we obviously like to complain about. But when they let her tell a story and she deserves to get her ass kicked, we're right on board with that because we like
Mm-hmm.
good stories and we like the story to end the way that it's supposed to end. And you know what? When it's time for when she's a heel and it's time for her to lose, we'll be the first to be like, "Yep,
Mm-hmm.
it's happened." You know, It's happening, and it should happen. All right, let's get to our list.
All right.
Top 10. Um, what criteria did you use? Is it 2024 or just now they're
I used 2024 now, but here's my criteria. So I took in obviously all 10 of these women are capable or very good in-ring performers if given the right platform. But I also looked at their characters and how they're presented. So like I look at this from a ticket buying perspective, which is if I had to spend my money at this moment in time, which women's wrestlers would I most spend the money on to the least in this top 10 right now? So it's basically like if this person I know is wrestling right now, I'm not going to miss it. And that's who my number one person is.
okay.
So that's kind of the criteria I
It's
use. So go
it's
ahead.
I used a very similar criteria. You described it from a fan perspective. I use the same criteria, but from a promoter perspective.
Okay.
Basically, if I want to put a match on, which one are the fans standalone going to rally around, want to see, want to tune in? So we really use the same criteria.
Okay. So do you want to just do our do you want to go you go 10, I go 10?
Yeah. You go
Okay.
10, I'll go 10, and then I'll do my top five all time. I'll go first on the all time.
Okay. All right. So my top 10 current women's wrestlers based on the criteria I just mentioned. Number 10 is Willow. Number 9 is Nia Jax. Number 8 is Athena. Number 7 is Bianca Belair. Controversy now. Number 6, Mercedes Moné. Number 5, Stephanie Vacour. Number 4, Rhea. Number 3, Julia. Number 2, Roxanne. And number 1, Io.
All right.
And just to add context to the number 1, I have realized now that if Io fights, I'm gonna watch. No matter what it is, I seek it out, whether it's on Speed, whether it was on NXT. Io has now become the most must-see women's wrestler for me at this very present moment.
That's fair. Um, Now that I hear your list, I do think our criteria was a little bit different because I think you did weight it on that just must see TV only. I did factor in 2024 accomplishments um, along with like current standing and in some level of match quality during the time. Um, so number 10, I actually have Mariah. Number 9, I have Willow. Uh, Number 8, I have Bailey. Number 7, I have Athena. Number 6, I have Stephanie. Oh, and real quick, um, did it on only things that occurred in North America.
Okay.
So that's why Julia is not going to make my list. Um, what I say? Number 6, Stephanie. Um, Number 5, Bianca. Number 4, what the hell? Oh, number 4, Io. Number 3, Rhea. Number 2, Roxanne, and number 1, Mercedes. Now I'll make the argument for Mercedes. The NJPW strong version of Mercedes that you flew to Washington,
Mm-hmm.
D.C. to see is the most premier women's wrestler on the planet. I still think that if you booked a show against another good opponent, and there was nothing else and there was no promotion behind it. And it was just this person versus this person. And it wasn't WWE promoting it. It wasn't AEW promoting it. It wasn't NJPW. It was just Mercedes Moné versus. And it was a solid opponent or a dream match. It would have the most buzz based on her name, right? So I still think she's the biggest free agent signing. If everyone was a free agent right now, I think she could command the most money. And I get her to number one on match quality as well. Because again, the Willow, Stephanie, the sheet of like there's a ton of match quality in there that that I think just you know
Yeah.
I I had EO behind Rhea and I struggled with that one only just because they're on the same show and one's presented clearly as higher. And so I had a hard time saying that EO was higher than Rhea, but based on match quality, I almost put her there.
The Mercedes New Japan presentation is excellent, and I wish AEW would watch how she's presented in NJ, in New Japan. Let me ask you this: is that the only New Japan match she's had all year?
Yep,
Because when she fought Stephanie for the New Japan belt, it was on an AEW show, but that was not on a New Japan show, right? So the show I went to was the only New Japan show she's had all year.
correct.
Okay. So then I didn't miss it because when I heard you talk, I'm like, oh, did I miss her being on other New Japan events other than the one I went to? And I felt like
Mm.
that was what actually hurt Mercedes on my list, which is she doesn't have enough of those moments. Because as great as the Willow match is, the Willow match is one of my three favorite matches this year. It's phenomenal. The Stephanie match was excellent. I rewatched it actually last night, and
It's so good.
it is really good. I like the first one a little bit more, but I like this one more because of the crowd and stuff like that. So it's like a toss up. But the issue is the story didn't even become about the match. It became the Stephanie story, right? So like Mercedes, for all she did in that match, doesn't necessarily get the kudos because it's about, well, this match propelled Stephanie to this superstar free agent status where they flew her on a private plane to Toronto to sign her. And then the other part of that story is Britt came back and actually looked like a legitimate big star.
Yeah.
So that kind of hurt. And then, we don't want to talk about it, but the Brit Max, the Sheeta Max, the ones that are on pay-per-view, it didn't necessarily help her.
But
I it didn't hurt her to me, but it didn't help her because like EO now, and I know you watch the product, but like when EO is on my screen, she just leaps off the page. Like she has such an aura to her right now that I do not want to take my eyes off the screen when EO fights. And it's like the crowd is so behind her. They're like, EO, EO. And it's just like the way she does her moves and her comebacks. And I'm not going to spoil it for anybody, but there's a fatal four-way on this upcoming episode of SmackDown. It's EO versus Bianca versus Lash Legend versus Piper Niven. And that's one of the big matches on SmackDown. And from everything I've read, EO was the most over in the match. I don't know that. I haven't watched it yet, but like that's what I'm like when EO's on my screen now, I cannot take my eyes off of her. And that's the same thing with Julia, and it's the same thing with Stephanie, and it's the same thing with Rhea, which are my top four. And I think that's because of presentation. I don't disagree with you that on match quality, Mercedes still isn't either number one or number two behind Roxanne.
yeah, so um the thing I was going to say about Mercedes is she's held to if you're a WWE fan and you're gonna hate on the Brit match and the Sheeta match, I'm gonna tell you right now, both of those matches were better than a lot of the prime women in WWE of any of their pay-per-view matches this year. And
Yeah.
I'm not gonna point fingers and pick who, but the top five women in the WWE, they all have worse pay-per-view matches than the Brit match this year. The Brit match, they actually did some things that a lot of women are not able to do. But Raj, to your point earlier in the show, that All In show, again, there's no promotional thought put into throwing fastballs for 6 hours. And so
Yeah.
it's I do want to touch on a couple things. Neither one of us had Timeless Tony Storm in our top 10, and she's number one by PWI. I have some bias there. Character work is incredible, has been incredible, maybe the best,
Yeah.
but I it's the Mariah stuff. I've not changed my channel to go see her stuff. So um that's probably a me thing more than anything. But if I was starting a promotion, she wouldn't make my top 10 right now. And that's kind of the way I looked at it is if all these women were free agents, the 10 I named, and it's nothing against Tony because I think everyone here hopefully has a lot of respect for the 10 women that I named. And I didn't name Becky and Charlotte because they're not active. Um, these are the 10 women who, in order, I would go out if I was a GM and go, start my roster with Mercedes Moné. Roxanne. I put Roxanne over Rhea because if I didn't get Mercedes, Roxanne will hold down my match quality. That's the show. That's the type of show I'd like to book. But that's my
Yeah.
reason for not having Tony. I know some people might hate that, but
There are three women that I struggled with. You have one on your list. Tony Storm is the other, and Tiffany Stratton is the third.
mm-hmm.
Those are the three women I struggled with because if you were to start a promotion, you got to look at Tiffany, right?
Yeah,
If that's the criteria, you got to look at Tiffany, right?
Liv
She has
too, and
every
neither one of
live
us
live
said
too,
Liv. Yeah.
but Liv Morgan has been one of my favorite women's wrestlers for a while when they actually let her wrestle.
Yeah.
And I think that she has become like again, if this was the top 10 characters, the list is totally different because it would be Tony, it would be Io, not Io, it'd be Liv, it would be Tiffany, it might be Chelsea. Like to me, it would be a totally different list because I think Chelsea is one of the best characters in
100%.
all of wrestling, including the women, obviously, of course, for the women. So to me, I just took the criteria. I tried to blend it, and I just did it this way. Again, if I'm watching, other than watching football, which I'm not going to change for any wrestling match, it doesn't matter. But if I'm watching, let's say, the Lakers last night play Sacramento, and LeBron's on a heater. Oh, Io's fighting this person. I would watch. I would effectively try to change the channel to find the Io match, or I would pick up my phone to watch Io, and that's why Io is my number one because at this
It's a
point,
great number one.
she is the person I most want to see on my weekly TV for women. And the thing is with Mercedes specifically, that's who Io now is what Mercedes has been for me for years. Where it doesn't matter how crappy the Raw show was, I will make it a point to seek out the Mercedes segment. And then I might turn the rest of the show off.
Yeah.
And I do that with AEW now anyway, with her to support her. But I want more out of what they're giving me with her in AEW. That's my hope.
Yeah. I think Mercedes also brings that outside of the ring. Again, if you're starting a promotion, obviously Tony's got that part right, where she's first front and center even over all the men when it comes to promoting
Mm-hmm.
AEW at this point. Was the third person you had trouble leaving off your list Bailey?
Yeah, Bailey.
Yeah,
Well, then, yeah, it's four. It's Bailey, Tiff, Mariah May, Tony Storm. All four of those women have had unbelievable years. It's with Bailey. She got real cold in the summer with what they were doing with her title reign. But I really like what they're doing with Bailey and Naomi now. And Naomi's another one. Like if I had to make this list 15, that would have been my 15. It would have been Naomi, Bailey, Mariah, Tony,
it
Tiffany, and then the 10.
it speaks to how deep women's wrestling is now.
Yeah.
This top 10 is impossible. There's no way. I mean, you have You have a top 10 that we just, again, we didn't name Tony Storm, Liv. Neither one of us named Tony or Liv.
Liv, yep, Liv is another one.
Um, we neither one of us listed Jordan Grace. That's because we don't really cover TNA. It's nothing against Jordan. It's just not an informed opinion. By the way, shout out to Masha Slamovich for winning the TNA title last night.
Yes.
But one I could argue. I hope this changes in a year. The person who doesn't belong on the list, if we're being really honest, over Tony or Liv or Tiffany, really, if we're talking presentation, but it's not her fault. So far has been Athena, and I
Yeah.
hope this changes next year. And here's my point on that: she's the hardest one to rank because she's putting up an all-time heater right now, and nobody watches ROH. And I only
Yeah.
ranked her. I didn't rank TNA, but I did rank her because it's visible enough on the AEW product that you know it's there. And why I say I hope this changes next year is Tony needs to get her up onto the main roster. We need that Mercedes Athena feud. It needs to main event All In, and more eyes need to get to see the generational talent that is Athena. But I snuck her into the top 10 literally only on basically match quality and record because her presentation, not her fault, but again, her exposure, we'll call it, because it's nothing wrong with her presentation, but the level of exposure just doesn't compare to everybody else.
Yeah, that's very fair. And I put her on the list for the exact same reason, which is her work is undeniable. But it's like nobody knows her work is undeniable except for like a very small group of
People listen to this
diehards.
podcast.
Yeah, yeah. So I will say she's one of WWE's biggest failures.
Yep.
They failed her badly. I mean, you were in Toronto for her versus Bailey. That was an all-time flop of a title match.
What's crazy is Athena is everything I said about what I wish Ricochet would be more often. That's who she is. She's got all the flips and stuff that Ricochet and Osprey do, all that athleticism, all of that ability. But she dials it down just one or two, and the matches still feel like a fight. They're just very high impact fights. I mean, you look at the match with Asuka and just incredible. All right, do we want to do our all-time top 5?
Yeah, yeah. Why don't you go first?
All right, so this is a ridiculous thing to try to do, especially when you open it up beyond just one promotion. I think you are going to, I guess you are properly going to represent a little bit more of the world than I am. I can only speak to what I saw. I know what happened in Japan in the 90s, but I wasn't watching it, so I'm not going to pretend that I did. So this is my all-time top 5. I did, this is all criteria of this was the women's record versus women. And so and wrestling was a big component. So Miss Elizabeth will not be on this list, though she's one of the most important women in wrestling history. China is also not on this list, and hear me out. If I rank these same women and put them on an all-time superstars list, I actually think I'd have China as the number 2 woman. Counting when she's beating up men and she's in segments with men and all that, she's number 2. But in this particular list, I'm only ranking based on what they did in the women's division, women's segments, women's matches. And most of China's great stuff was done similar to what Rhea did over the last year in men's segments and standing out in men's segments. All props in the world to China. I'm going to go first to 5th. And again, it's just a ridiculously stupid list to try to make. Number 1 is Sasha Banks, Mercedes Moné. I'm actually going to make a non-match quality argument that she's the greatest women's wrestler, at least in North American history, and I will not bring up match quality. Been working on this all week. Number 2 is Becky Lynch. Number 3 is Asuka. Number 4, and this is kind of the opposite of the Athena thing. This is lesser on match quality and more on impact and just eyes and stuff. But let's see. I even struggle. It's hard to not put all 4 horsewomen because I think they did make that type of impact, but I don't have all 4 of them on this list. I got AJ Lee 4th. I think she's the greatest woman ever on the mic, and she was good enough in the ring, and she had a lot of good quality feuds. And then number 5, I almost don't want to pick Charlotte or Bayley just to not pick one over the other. I don't believe there's a lesser horsewoman. I believe that there's a best horsewoman. There's not a lesser horsewoman. So um, I almost I'm almost just gonna cheat and not, but I'm gonna say in this particular moment, um, Charlotte is 5th,
Okay.
and
So go ahead.
that's a whole struggle. And then I'll let you name your list, but I really want to. It's easy for me to say Mercedes is number 1, but I actually think there's an incredibly good argument behind it, which I'll say after your list.
So I just want to recap. You went Sasha Mercedes 1, Becky 2, Asuka 3, AJ Lee 4, Charlotte 5.
Correct.
So what's very interesting is if you compare my top 5 to yours, the folks we have in the same positions are probably for the exact same reasons. They're just different people. But I'm interested to hear your Mercedes Sasha point for the non-ring work. So before I give you my list, I'm curious. You have me kind of on a cliffhanger here.
All right. So women's wrestling was what it was in 2012, 13, and 14. As great as Nikki Bella and AJ Lee were, and Paige even back then, I got to give them all their props for what they did. It wasn't what it is today, and we know that, and that's not my opinion because Give Divas a Chance was still something that trended on Twitter. Okay, so the reason why the horsewomen need to make every top 10 list that ever existed, it's like a big bang in, I think in basketball, of the 75 greatest players of all time, I think 60 of them are like 1975 and on or something like that, or we're playing by 1975 and on, right? So might even be more than that. I think it's a similar thing with women's wrestling. So knowing all of the ground that we covered over 2015 to get to now, 10 years, the seminal moments, the bookmarks, the benchmarks, I mean, that climb the ladder, the rungs that climb the ladder. To take women from give divas a chance to booked like men, spending shows and being some of the most important people on the shows. I look at it as a ladder. Now the 4 horsewomen were involved in almost all of it. It was a group project.
Mm-hmm.
They all understood the assignment. But if you were a teacher grading their work and you looked at it, Sasha Mercedes ranks first, and I'll walk you through it now. Again, picture a ladder. Rung 1, Sasha versus Charlotte San Jose. Vince McMahon sees the match and says, "Oh my God, this is WrestleMania quality. These are women who I would present on this show wrestling on my show wrestling like this." One step up the ladder. Rung 2, Sasha and Bayley steal the show in Brooklyn. Best match on the show. People forget Kevin Owens and Finn Balor even had a match after. That's rung 2. Rung 3, that match is so good. Main event a show. Bailey. So we've got Sasha Charlotte, Sasha Bailey, Sasha Bailey. We're going up the ladder. Rung 4. We want Sasha 15 into 2016. I argue that she's the first woman ever to be the most over wrestler on the show for wrestling. I think Sable was the most over woman on the show for a while, or most over person on the show for a while. It wasn't necessarily for wrestling. She was the most over person, including over the men, in 2016 on the main show. Sasha Charlotte, the #1 main roster women's feud of all time. Main evented several shows, main evented Raws, main evented the very first ever, I pointed to that, Hell in a Cell, the first ever women's main event on the main roster. That was Sasha and Charlotte. So the first match that got Vince's attention to that level, Brooklyn, respect. We want Sasha, Charlotte versus Sasha, Hell in a Cell. Now the next rung, she was not involved. It was Becky, Ronda, and Charlotte. And there's probably a Becky rung in there being like top merch and stuff like that. Becky, and then Becky, Ronda, Charlotte being the first WrestleMania main eventers. However, then I would argue that she's got the next rung by being the first ever Mania main event on a singles match. And she was put in there with a rookie. And I think that that's a feather in her cap that no one could ever take away from her. They had no reason to, Bianca's amazing. They had no reason to know she was going to crush in the main event, but they knew that Sasha would crush and that they would crush because Sasha was in there. So I just went through a ladder rung that's about 10 rungs up, and she was involved in 8 of the 10 rungs. And you can't delete her from that history. And that's why I'm saying it was a group assignment. They were all involved. Charlotte was in there a lot. Becky was in there a lot. Bailey was in there a lot. Sasha was in there the whole freaking time. Oh, and I missed one. Between WrestleMania, and WrestleMania, first women's tag title, right? Got the tag belts created. That was her and Bailey. And then the last rung is that she is the first ever women's superstar free agent to hit the open market and sign for a men's level deal. Every other women's free agent ever was on the come up side, not on the established superstar side. And she's the first person to have both major, bring both major promotions to the board and get a multi-million-dollar offer from both promotions. So that's the best women's wrestler of all time. All these seminal moments from 2015 when we've had the most growth in women's wrestling, she's been involved in 90% of them.
So I think you nailed that. Every single reason you pointed out is exactly why I would argue that if you had to rank the 4 horsewomen, she would be #1 of the 4 because of everything you labeled out. And that's despite most people who watch wrestling looking at Becky as the bigger star because Becky has been presented as the bigger star. At least recently, not early in their careers, but now for sure. So there are 3 things. So before I give you my list, there's 2 other, I don't want to say lists, but criterias that I want people to understand. Let's say I were to make a list for the most impactful women of all time in the history of WWE. The list would be, in no particular order, be these 3 women: Miss Elizabeth, Chyna, Sable. Those would be the list. That would be the 3. Those 3 women transcended just wrestling. At any time they were on the show, they might have been the most over person on the show with Hulk Hogan, with Macho Man, with Stone Cold Steve Austin, with The Rock, with Triple H, with Undertaker, in all of them. These women were that over. So if you were to just look at most impactful, it would be those 3. You can't deny that.
Yep.
If you were to ask me to rank the five most influential women of all time, the person I have as number one would be number one still in on my list, and then the next four would be the four horsemen. All four of them. I would put all four on the list because I think that group of five women have influenced women's wrestling more than anybody else in my lifetime. Now, my list is basically my favorite five women of all time based on in-ring criteria, presentation, and how impactful they have been not only to me as a watcher, but to the wrestling audience. So I'm going to go in reverse order. I'm going to go from five to one. So number five for me, and this is going to be a controversial one in itself, is going to be Io Sky. So the reason I put Io there is Io to me reminds me closest to my number one. So Io is a person who, when I started really liking women's wrestling in the 90s, it was all about All Japan. Io is the closest resemblance to that style of women's wrestling that I grew up on, tape trading, giving my ECW tapes away for to get All Japan in Toronto. So Io Sky is my number five. She has a distinguished career in Japan. She's done a lot of great things in WWE. So Io is my number five.
I had her like seven.
Number four, again, the same reason you had your person at number four, I have this person at number four, Trish Stratus. Because Trish Stratus is basically the bridge of she's part of the Divas era, but she's also a women's wrestler who's had some really good women's wrestling matches in an era when she wasn't necessarily allowed to have women's wrestling matches.
Yep.
She had the match with Lita that main evented Raw. She had the Survivor Series match with Lita where she bled. That was shocking. She was in, a tables match. She's been in hardcore matches, but she had the great match with Mickie James at WrestleMania.
I
So Trish, from a presentation standpoint, I don't know if there's a woman who's ever been presented better than Trish Stratus.
I agree, and it's so dumb I don't have her in my top five. Where I struggle with Trish is I'm biased in that I sat in the crowd for a Charlotte Trish match that, and it's kind of bad that I have Charlotte in my top because the memory of it was that it didn't feel like a legendary match, and it
No,
should have.
no, it didn't.
But
But again, to Trish's credit, she has come back and had the feud with Becky, which I think has taken some of the stench off of that Charlotte feud.
yep,
Number three, speak of the devil, is Rebecca Quinn, Becky Lynch. So Becky Lynch has a match resume catalog that is very underrated, and we've already outlined it on this podcast. She's also definitively, there was a time where the men of Daniel Bryan, AJ Styles, Randy Orton did not want to follow Becky Lynch because she got that loud of a crowd reaction and they could not follow her. That's a huge feather in her cap. She turned herself from the Irish last kicker to the man to big time Bex, best-selling author, won the title, retained the title at WrestleMania while she was pregnant. Um, for all of the controversy she might get, she's an unbelievable performer. She's an unbelievable promo. She's the complete package. And you talk about the whole starting a promotion thing or free agency. If Becky Lynch is legitimately a free agent, which we don't know if she is right now, she already signed with WWE and just waiting to come back. If she is, she could command the same amount of money Mercedes could as a
absolutely.
definitive free agent. So she's number three. Number two is the aforementioned Sasha Banks, Mercedes Moné. And look, you've already done the lion's share of talking about how great she is, so I'm not gonna, regurgitate that. Simply put, to me, I look at women's wrestling in North America as before NXT Brooklyn, after NXT Brooklyn. And without NXT Brooklyn, I don't think we are where we are with women's wrestling today. She's 50% of that equation, but the Charlotte match with her in San Jose is part of it. But I just think her character in 2015 is what helped evolve women's wrestling in North America. Because yes, I know everybody's going to tell me, "Oh, TNA was doing it. Awesome Kong, Gail Kim, and Gail Kim was somebody I struggled with too on this list because she's had some unbelievable stuff with Awesome Kong. But again, WWE is the Kleenex, and what Sasha Banks was able to do in WWE, I think is landmark in itself. So she deserves my number two. She has the match quality resume to prove it. She has the star power. She is number two. But number one, and I want to point this out, is also Mercedes Moné's number one. Sasha Banks' number one is Manami Toyota. And for those of you who are not familiar with All Japan Pro Wrestling, you can YouTube Manami Toyota, Aja Kong, Bull Nakano, Hokada, all of that in 1995, 1994, 1996, 1993, etc. This woman was selling out the Tokyo Dome at 50,000 people in the 90s. So if you want to do well, she's not the draw that Mercedes is or Becky is. Are you sure? Because I don't think we can ever say Mercedes or Becky or Trish could sell at 50,000 by themselves, like as them being the marquee, and it's an all women's show.
Right.
Right. And she was so ahead of her time that the stuff she did influenced Chris Jericho, influenced Will Ospreay, influenced Ricochet, influenced folks like MVP, Nakamura. So, like, this is a woman in the 90s who men stole moves from.
Yep.
So, if you want to go down that, I don't know if there's a stronger argument to be made than the person who's number two on this list and number one on your list says, well, that's my number one.
Yeah, and influencing men, and I think Mercedes is the closest to that because you got guys like DG and Mello
Mhm.
who are not afraid to say Mercedes influences them. It's not a wrong answer. I wasn't in the I'm not I don't I don't pretend that I was
Yeah,
watching
yeah.
that in the 90s, but it's the resume is unimpeachable. 50,000 to headlining all you had to say was headline the Tokyo Dome. Even if it was a
And to be
WWE
fair,
card that she was on,
yes,
she wasn't, and it was 50,000 people. Maybe she didn't sell it by herself. She headlined the Tokyo Dome. That's
yeah.
it. That's all you got to say.
I have always loved the genre of professional wrestling, but I will be honest, in the mid 90s, both companies really sucked. The North American companies. The WWE was awful. They had a main event at SummerSlam of Undertaker versus Undertaker. That's awful. WCW was doing Hogan versus Flair probably 10 years past it should have been doing.
You didn't like
And
Isaac Yankem?
no, I certainly didn't. And I remember my friend Garfield, so shout out to Garfield, he had a cable box that got ECW. And so he would tape ECW for me and give me the tapes. So I would see the Benoits, I would see Eddie Guerrero's, I would see Saturn, I would see all of the ECW stuff. And there's a place in Toronto called the Dragon Center where you get some of the best Chinese food in the city. But what they have at the Dragon Center, oh, sorry, no, I'm confusing my Toronto landmarks here. Pacific Mall in Markham. And Pacific Mall is where you would go to get Japanese video games. In that mall, they sold All Japan women's wrestling tapes. Well, I had ECW tapes, and I was able to go to this store and with the owner give for every ECW tape I would give him, he would give me an All Japan tape. And so that's where the tape trading thing started because he would tell me these women in Japan are killing each other. Like he would literally, that's how he would sell it to me. Like, you got to see this. These women are killing each other. They're literally like going through tables. They're really like pile driving each other on the concrete. Like this. So I'm watching ECW. I'm already into the shock value stuff. They're telling me women are doing what ECW is doing. Okay, I got to see that. And then when I watch these women, I couldn't believe. Like again, I'm a teenager. I don't realize about being politically correct and all that. I'm like, women can do this? Like literally when I'm watching Toyota, Nakano, all of them, like, women can do this? Holy cow, like this is blowing my mind. And then when I got later in life and I got to hear the Chris Jerichos and all of these men talk about the influence that Manami, like Chris Jericho said, it's Ricky Steamboat and Manami Toyota who have had the influence on his career. That resonates with me a lot too, because it's like, holy cow, like this is a woman who had that kind of influence on American men's wrestlers who were also trying to learn the craft by tape trading, like what I was doing as a fan. And I think with Toyota, um, it sucks that she never got to wrestle in WWE, but the truth is, they wouldn't have known what to do with her in 1995 anyway. Like they had a series of really good matches in WWE, which is Medusa, Michelli, or Alundra Blaze against Bull Nakano. Like those are some really good matches. I think it's on SummerSlam, one of the SummerSlams.
Yep.
But like, man, the stuff Toyota was doing with these women, it's just unbelievable. Like when you watch it now, you might be like, holy cow, they were doing this 20, 30 years ago. Like that's what people have to understand. 30
Oh,
years ago, they were doing it.
in the clips I have heard, or in the clips I've seen, yeah, I mean, just top rope stuff, at a full run, at a full sprint, just full sprint, jump up, top rope, somersault, just a bunch of stuff that, um, literally the type of um, high flying you would see from Ricochet and Osprey, but a small, a Japanese woman. Um, think of it like if you haven't seen, it's like Io Sky unhinged. You know what I mean? Like it's like if they just told Io she's allowed to do whatever she wants and just do the craziest things, because she probably would too. But no, that's a great list. Um, neither one of us had. I didn't have Trish. Neither one of us had Lita. Neither one of us had Nikki Bella. Neither one of us had Bailey. You didn't have Asuka. I think it's just proof it's just a very, very difficult task. I do want to defend Charlotte over Bailey real quick. If it were a list of my favorites, Bailey's number two. I like Bailey more than I like Becky Lynch. For me, I love Bailey. I've met her. I could watch Brooklyn every day for the rest of my life, and she's just as part of that as Mercedes is.
Mm-hmm.
Mercedes didn't carry anything. In fact, again, the moment is Bailey's moment. I love Bailey.
Mm-hmm.
You have to take a little bit of booking into account when you make a list like this, in my opinion. And you got to give Charlotte credit for as many times as she's been in the big matches, as many of the big matches that she's won, um, as many titles as she's had. And for me, the main factor, and I hate it again, it's nothing against Bailey, but Charlotte, the easier A side of a feud than Bailey is, in my opinion. If I'm just talking about putting on the marquee there, um, and that's mostly because of the way WWE's booked her, right? So I'm taking into account the way that she's been booked. It's a coin flip still. I mean, if um, Bailey could easily be ahead of Asuka or AJ or Charlotte on this list. I mean, Bailey to me is still in her prime, and if I would have, maybe I miss Charlotte a little bit. I don't know, but that's kind of the coin flip. I gave Charlotte the benefit of the booking WWE has given her, and that's
Yeah.
that's how I picked Bailey. Um, the other thing I took into account in making the argument for Mercedes being number one, her having the greatest women's main roster feud of all time was a big part of it, and Charlotte was on the other side of that.
Yeah.
And as a women's wrestling fan, the feeling I felt Mondays when Charlotte and Mercedes were feuding is actually the number one feeling I'm chasing as a fan, because I knew that we were going into Monday and they were going to be bigger, better, and put on a more impressive showing, and be a hotter feud than the men. Um, so I give a lot of weight to that with Charlotte as well.
So we don't care about star ratings. It's not our thing. Somebody else does that. From 1991 to 1995, Manami Toyota has 17 five-star matches. If you combine all the other women combined, they don't have that number. But that's one person's opinion. It's a bias. I don't, I'm not, that's not the end all be all. But what I'm saying about it is you think about wrestling in the 90s, right? Like Ric Flair, Randy Savage, Ricky Steamboat, and that this woman was getting those type of ratings. Now, the truth is, the same person who comes up with these ratings says the two most influential things are Macho Man Randy Savage for the men wrestling because he was the guy who introduced the high flying stuff, like to a real jumping out of the ring onto the turnbuckle, like onto the rails and all that stuff, and then the Japanese women. But I I actually think Charlotte is somebody I have to evaluate better in my own list because she does have a hell of a resume and she has produced a hell of a career. And she's been part of so many big moments that I think I hold her. I actually do the reverse of you, which is I hate her booking. And what I mean is, yes, she is booked very well, but she's booked well in the wrong areas and she's booked incorrectly in other areas. I hate the short title reigns. I hate they threw her into the Rousey Becky story. Like, I hold that against her. It's not
Yep.
her fault. But as a talent, she has everything. She can talk, she can work, she looks good, she has the aura, she knows how to dress. Like, she has everything. So I can't dispute any ranking of her being in any top five. Like, do I think she's like, am I a Mark Henry person who says she's here and everybody else is here? No, that I think that's a little ridiculous. But I do kind of feel that way about Manami Toyota compared to everybody else because she has the resume to back it up, which is the influence, the drawing power, and she was just so ahead of her time. But yeah, I mean, it's tough, man. It's a tough thing to do. There's so many great women all time currently. I mean, obviously we struggled in doing our current list, but I think that tells us how healthy the industry is.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I remember a time when I used to be able to do top 10 and top 5 all-time lists easily, and I hate to feel like I'm disrespecting any of these women just because all of what they've put into the industry. Um, and any list has personal biases in it, so I think anyone listening knows that, and they'll have a different list, but their personal biases are in there too. Um, but the top 10 now, I think the real way to look at it, and maybe this can be an ongoing topic for us because we both kind of did it the same without discussing it, is um, you know, from a almost like a monetary, like a free agent ranking type of thing, because that's really where the industry is going to need to go, because every single time one of these women come up on their contract, I hope that that they break that next ceiling of contracts. And um and we've said it before, Rhea just got paid. Hopefully Becky got paid,
Mm-hmm.
is getting paid. When Mercedes deal is up in 3 years, she's going to get paid again. Roxanne's going to get a mega deal at a very young age because of how much of a prodigy she's been. So lot of health in the industry. As we wrap up, do you have anything else you want to add?
No, I think what I would encourage folks who do support our show, whether it's on all the audio feeds, Spotify, RSS, Amazon, Samsung, or even on Apple Podcasts, and especially the YouTube page, where the comments are obviously more visible to the public, I would recommend you put your top five or your current top 10. I'd love to hear, we would love to hear or read the comments on who your top five are all time or your top 10, because everybody has different perspective and they're going to have different things that resonate with them. So I would like to see that personally. I'm
Absolutely.
curious.
For
The
sure.
other thing is, tonight we don't know what the match order is right now, but there is a chance that another was the last time women main evented um a show Becky Tiffany in
For
NXT.
NXT. Yeah.
Okay, so we have
One of the main shows. Yeah, I think so.
yeah, so we have a
Pretty sure.
chance tonight, which would be history making. That would be a tag team women's match that has no titles on it would main event. And while I know folks are gonna like, is that a big deal? It's a very big deal
It's a huge
because
deal.
a tag team women's match that has no title ramifications, it's just a grudge tag match to main event a WWE show of any kind tells me how far women's wrestling has really come in terms of being placed on equal footing. So let's hope HBK does the right thing tonight and main events this match because we all were really upset that when Roxanne fought Jada Parker and that was Julia's debut, he didn't end the show with Julia coming out and staring Roxanne. So let's hope he does
Yeah.
it tonight.
Yeah, let's hope so. And those four women getting a main event without a belt involved would just prove how valued they are in NXT, just based on their accomplishments and kind of what their upside is. And it's Sean investing in them. I think it'd be huge. So let's hope it happens. Definitely rooting for it. Um, for everyone who continues to listen to us, we absolutely appreciate the support. So a funny thing, I'll link on Twitter and in our YouTube. Um, we had some designed some shirts, and I'm personally getting one for myself, and gonna get Raj one as well here. In case you guys don't know, we do this because we enjoy it. We do this for fun. Both of us have full careers, so we're not really doing this to, retire from that or anything like that. So we're not
Mhm.
trying to over make money or anything like that. But we have couple of shirt concepts that have a balance sheet on the back, support women's wrestling on the back. On the front was a thing I guess I came up with while I was driving about a month ago, and after one of our podcasts, the Four Horsewomen podcast. Uh, but the front of it says "Steal the show like Mercedes and Pam," which I thought was something that really matched what we talk about on here a lot. Just that mindset of having to go in and be better than everyone at what you're doing. Um, and then another one that says "Here to see the women's title match" on the front with a balance sheet on the back. I'll link the store you can get them from. We didn't have to like buy a ton of these. We don't need to sell them. Basically, we're selling them through a website that they get made if any of you guys order them. But I'm gonna order it and I'm gonna wear
Mhm.
one as soon as I get it. And it'd be a cool way if you guys do want to support us. And we just continue to appreciate your support in listening to us.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you all for the support. The numbers have grown every week, which is what we like, and we've learned that certain folks move the needle more than others, just like actual wrestling TV. So that's interesting in itself. But this was a very fun episode. I enjoy doing the top five. I enjoy doing the top 10, and I think that again, to me, it just speaks to the depth of women's wrestling historically, which is a little underrated. And I think currently, right now, I don't think it's ever been better in terms of the talent pool. I mean, it's just there's so much talent. I mean, we didn't even talk about Lash Legend, Jada Parker, like we didn't talk about
Card,
any of these women. Sorry, Piper, Chelsea, like Meechin. There's so many women now. It's such a great time to be a women's wrestling fan. So thank you all for your support. And again, like I say every week, enjoy some football today.
yes, sir. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.